Hi guys, and welcome back to my course. In this video, we will talk about JSX. So let's start with what is JSX. Check out this code. It looks very much like HTML, but it's not HTML. It is called JSX and it is a syntax extension to JavaScript. It allows us to define React elements using syntax that looks very similar to HTML. It is used to define the look of the UI. Basically, just like you write HTML code to define the structure of your web page, you use JSX to define the structure of React components. So if this is the purpose of using JSX, why can't we simply use HTML? Well, it provides us with a lot more than just this. It couples the rendering logic with other UI logic, such as event handling, state changing, displaying data, etc., etc. Now, if you look at this code again, we have some curly braces in the JSX code. Inside these curly braces, you can write JavaScript expressions. In this line of code, we have used a variable for setting the paragraph text. Similarly, we can use a function, operator, and much more. Let's try some examples to understand it better. Say we wanted to create a user details card, which contains full name, age, and job. So as you can see here, my local server is running. If you check my browser, the app is running in my browser. So coming back to the code, let's try cleaning it. Let's save it. So as you can see, everything is gone from this screen. So whatever you write inside the return statement of this function is shown in the web page. And when you save this file, the local server automatically updates your application in the browser. This automatic update feature of React is called hot reload. Okay, so let's try writing the code now. So for full name, we can use an h3. And inside the h3, we can simply do full name colon John Wick. For age, we can use a paragraph, say 28. And for job, we can have another paragraph, say gentleman. Let's save it. Let's check the browser. As you can see, we've got full name, age, and job rendered on our web page. Let's bring this here. Okay, so if I change this code, say instead of 28, I'll make it 32. Or instead of John Wick, I make it John Lark. And job, let's say anonymous. Let's save it. And as you can see, everything changes on the screen. So this is all static data. So whatever we're writing inside these tags are getting rendered on the screen. So let's try using some variables for displaying this data. So let's create a variable over here. Say const first name is equal to John. Another variable, say last name is equal to Wick. Another variable, say age equals to 28. And job is equal to gentleman. Okay, so we've got some variables ready, which hold the details of our user card. Now, how do we use them? So if you remember earlier in the video, I told you that we can use JavaScript expressions inside curly braces when we are working with JSX. So curly braces, we can simply call first name here. Let's save it. And as you can see, full name is now just John. Now we also want last name. So there are two options. We can do space and last name. So this gives us John Wick. Or another way would be we can simply concatenate here and say last name. We still get the same result. Or we can use template strings. So backticks, dollar, first name, space, dollar, last name. Let's save it. And as you can see, we still get the same result. Similarly, we can do it for age. So curly braces, and we can pass the variable here, which was age. As you can see, the age is 28. Similarly, we can do for the job as well. So as you can see, now all this data is coming from these variables. So if I change the values here, say Toto, Wolf, let's say that. So the full name is updated. Similarly, we can update the age. And similarly, we can update the job. So that's how we can use variables inside the JSX. We can also use functions. So let's say we had a function which returns full name and we wanted to show that on screen. So let's create a function, say constant get full name. We can use an arrow function here. We can pass two values, say first name, comma last name. And what it does is it simply returns. We can use this template string over there. So it just returns first name space last name. Now to use this function, we can simply call it inside the curly braces, get full name. And to call it, we'll have to add parentheses as well. So let's say that. So it's giving us undefined because we haven't passed any value here. So we can simply pass our variables, say first name, last name. And as you can see, we're still getting the full name correctly. Now, because this is a single return statement, so we can also get rid of these return statement and the curly braces. So just a different syntax for arrow functions. And everything still works fine. Let's say we had an input field here. Let's save it. And as you can see, we got a box there. Now we can also add attributes just like you would add in HTML. So let's say placeholder equals to, we can give it a static value, say enter data. And as you can see, we get the placeholder in the input box. This data can also come from a variable. So let's say constant input placeholder, say enter your details. So instead of this normal string, we can use curly braces because now we're working with JavaScript expressions, and we can pass the variable here. And as you can see, now the input has enter your details. Okay, so just one thing to remember, when there are multiple words in the attribute name, it gets converted to camel casing, say autocomplete. So as you can see here, this is in camel casing. Now we can also store JSX in variables. So let's say we want this input element to be in a variable. Let's say details input box, and we can pass our JSX here. Now to use it, we can simply wrap it in curly braces and use the variable. So details input box. First, let's save it without the input box. So as you can see, there is no input box here. But now when I use it like this, in curly braces, we pass that variable which holds our JSX. It shows us our input box. Similarly, we can also access objects and arrays. Let's say we had an array here, say 1, 2, 3, 4, and we wanted to show some value here. Let's just say, so to access the array, we can simply do array and the location, as simple as that. So now when I save it, we get 1. Similarly, if there was an object, let's say an object name, say Toto, and age, say 30. So we can also use the object here. So let's say for age, we wanted to use that object. So an object dot followed by the property name of that object, which is age. So let's save it. And as you can see, age gets updated to 30. So don't worry if this feels a bit overwhelming for you. In the coming videos, we will be working all the time with JSX because that's how you create components and React elements. Now just one thing to remember, inside these curly braces, you can only pass the expression which generates some value by default. So you cannot have for loop inside, but you can have map statement, because by default, for does not return a value, but map returns an array. So if I add curly braces here and I try to write a for loop, it gives me an error, expression expected. But instead of for loop, if I write array.map, there's no error here. Similarly, you cannot have if else, but you can use a ternary operator. So if I write if something here, so it gives me an error. But if I simply write, say, array great at 0 greater than 0, question mark, say true, or else false, I save this, we get true printed over there. And that's all for today. I hope this gave you a better understanding of JSX, but if you have any doubts or queries, feel free to drop a comment below or reach out to me on Twitter. I'll add my Twitter handle in the description below. See you in the next video. Bye and take care. Hi guys, and welcome back to my course. In this video, we will talk a little more about JSX. In the previous video, we wrote some JSX code, and that JSX code rendered some UI elements in our application. So these are all pretty basics. We just created an h3 paragraph tag, etc. So let's try creating a bit more complex layout using JSX. Let's try creating a blog card. So let's say div, and inside that blog card, we can have a heading, say blog title 1. We can have a bit of description, say lorem ipsum dolor. Now when I save this, it gets updated in my application. So as you can see, this is a static block card, and as we discussed earlier, this data can also come from objects. So let's create one object. So we don't need all this code, so I'm just removing it. Say constant blog object, let's say title, say blog title 1, description. Let's just copy this. So now this object, it represents a block card. So let's try using these values. So blog object dot title. Similarly, blog object dot description. So when I save it, we still get the same data. Now say we wanted multiple of these cards. So let's just copy it. Let's say we wanted 3 cards. So 1 paste, 2 paste. So as you can see, now we've got 3 block cards. Now this doesn't look like a card because we haven't added any styles to it, and we haven't learned how to add styles. So let's just add a division between these so that they look different. Let's save it. And as you can see, now these look a little like 3 different cards, or 3 different sections at least. So what happens when we write this JSX code? So what happens behind the scenes? So this JSX code gets converted to JavaScript code by Babel. So let's check it out. So heading out to Babel. Okay, so if you write some code on the left-hand side, say division. So on the right-hand side, as you can see, it's giving us react.createElement with some parameters. So that's what happens. So every JSX element, it gets converted to this statement react.createElement. And this react.createElement method is imported from the React module. So if you notice in your code, on the top, we have imported this React module. So that's why it's required. So if I remove this and save my code, it gives us an error. So React must be in scope when using JSX. So let's bring it back. Okay, so coming back here to Babel. So this create element method, it can have 3 arguments. So the first one needs to be the element name. In this case, it's a division, so that's why we're giving div. Second is the properties or the attributes that we give here. So let's say we give it a class name, say main div. So that property comes is wrapped in an object and passed as a second argument. And third parameter or the third argument for this method is the child components. So let's say we have an h3 here. So as you can see, now the third argument or the third parameter is create element statement for the child. Similarly, if we had one more, so as you can see, and the second argument is null because we haven't passed any properties or attributes. So if we give this also a class name, say main heading, we get an object as the second argument, and inside that object we have all the properties. Similarly, there's another argument which represents the second child. So if we keep on adding child, number of arguments will keep increasing. And if we remove all the child elements, so our create element will just have two arguments, the element type and the object representing the element's properties. Okay, so moving on. All right, so let's try bringing our JSX code to Babel. So let's say, let's cut this. Let's paste it here. So as you can see, it's giving us an error. Adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. So there's a requirement for Babel to convert this JSX to JavaScript. The topmost element or the root element should always be 1. So in this case, there are 3. So we've got 1 div, 2 div, and 3 div. So I'll just copy this entire thing. And now when I paste it here, so it creates this JavaScript code for us. So this JSX is optional. So if I just copy this code, and instead of this JSX, I paste that JavaScript code with react.createElement, we still get the same structure. So as you can see, you have to write this kind of code to generate elements. So that's why JSX is recommended, because it helps you write more elegant and readable code. So here, there are so many React Create elements, you don't know which one is the parent element, which one is the child. So I'll just revert it back. And if you remember, I mentioned that there should always be one root element. So if I remove this wrapping div, I come back here, it gives us the same error. So adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in a closing tag. So that's why if I revert it back to a div, which is a parent element, the error goes away. So in React, we can also create our custom components. So when you write something like this, React interprets the lowercase elements as HTML elements. But if you write something like this, it doesn't give you an error because it expects this to be a custom component. So the Pascal case elements are treated as custom components. In the next video, we'll learn how to create custom components. And that's all for now. I hope this gave you a better understanding of JSX. But if you have any doubts or queries, feel free to drop a comment below or reach out to me on Twitter. I'll add my Twitter handle in the description below. See you in the next video. Bye and take care. Hi guys, and welcome back to my course. In this video, we will learn how to style React elements. To add styles, there are two options. Either we can give inline styles or we can use external style sheets. Now these elements, they don't look like cards. So let's try adding some styles. To add inline styles, just like HTML, you have an attribute called style. In HTML, it expects a string, but in JSX, it expects an object. And inside that object, you pass CSS properties and their values as key value pairs. So let's give it a try. So let's say style equals to, and curly braces because you're working with JavaScript now. So we'll be adding an object inside. So let's create an object. So curly braces to create an object. So let's give it some margin first. So margin, say 16 pixels. Let's give it some border radius. Say 5 pixels. Let's give it some box shadow. So let's say 0, 2 pixels, 5 pixels, hash, triple C. Now, if you notice, all the properties which had hyphen are now camel cased. So hyphen is gone and the name is now camel cased. So here, normal in CSS, you would write it as border hyphen radius, but when you're writing it in object, so you write it border radius with R capital. Same goes for box shadow and same goes for any other property which has hyphen. Let's save it. Let's check it out. Now this first one looks a bit like a card. Let's add some padding. Say 16 pixels. And let's add box sizing, say border box. Let's save it. Let's check it out. Let's bring our code editor also here. Okay, so now it looks like a proper card. So we can get rid of this HR tag. Let's get rid of it from here as well. Okay, so the first blog item looks like a card. So this is an object. So that means we can store it in a variable. So let's give it a try. So let's create a variable, say styles. And now this variable holds my style for the card. And we can simply pass this variable here inside these curly braces. Let's save it. And as you can see, it still looks like the card. Similarly, if you wanted to add styles to this div, you can simply do style equals to, and you can pass your styles variable here. And now the second one looks like a card. You can do the same thing for the third one. And as you can see, even the last one is looking like a card. Now the problem with inline style is that you cannot use pseudo elements, pseudo classes, media queries, and a lot more cool features of CSS. Although there are some libraries which help you do that, but we won't get into that right now. So a quick option is we put our styles in an external style sheet. So let's do that. So we already have a style sheet here. So let's try creating a new one. Let's delete this. Let's create a new file. So let's say app.css. So coming back here. Okay, so these are our styles. We can move them to app.css, but we all know to make these style works, we would need to select an HTML or in this case, JSX element. So for that, we can simply add class name. So let's get rid of these style tags and add class name. Let's say blog card. Let's save it. Let's copy this and let's remove this variable. So over here, dot class name. Let's remove these commas because now we're inside a CSS file, so we don't need this to be an object. And another thing to notice, these values should not be in double or single quotes. So let's remove these. Another thing, this is not how you write styles in CSS file. So we will have to get back to our box hyphen sizing. Same goes for border radius and same goes for box shadow. Let's save it and let's check our code. So as you can see, all the styles are gone now. None of these items looks like a card. So the problem is we have created a CSS file, but we haven't used it. So to import it, we can simply use the import keyword. So import followed by the relative path of the CSS file. So // now we get access to all the files next to our app.js file. So app.css. Let's save it. And as you can see, all the styles are back. Now all the text is left aligned. If you want to make it center aligned, we already have a class here app. So you can simply use it. So .app and text align, say center. So it works pretty much the same the way it works with HTML and CSS. So you can add classes, you can use combinators, pseudo classes, media queries, etc., etc. Now just a quick tip. We can use IDs, but it doesn't allow reusability of React components. That's why it is advised not to use IDs, but we have something provided by React for the same purpose. It is called refs. We will talk about refs and this reusability issue of ID in the coming videos. So even though this div is just one div, but still we gave it a class name and we gave the styles using that class name. Normally with HTML, you would want to use an ID, but when working with components, you avoid using IDs. And that's all for today. I hope this gave you a better understanding of how to add styles to your React elements. But if you have any doubts or queries, feel free to drop a comment below or reach out to me on Twitter. I'll add my Twitter handle in the description below. See you in the next video. Bye and take care. Hi guys, and welcome back to my course. In this video, we will learn how to dynamically generate React elements using lists. So earlier we created these React elements using this object. Now let's say we had an array of these objects. So title 2 and title 3. So now we've got an array, and inside that array we've got 3 objects which represent 3 different blog items. Let's get rid of this. Okay, so what we want is we want to iterate this list, and to iterate a list we can use map. So let's try that. Let's say blog cards, and the array is blog array dot map, and this map function, it requires a callback. So let's just give it an anonymous array function, and map also passes the current iterated item as an argument. So let's say item, let's try printing it first. Let's comment this for now. Let's save it. And as you can see, we've got these 3 objects printed in the console. So we've got access to the object. So now what we want is to access values from the current object and generate these React elements dynamically. Okay, so we can simply just return this. So return and our div. So instead of blog object, now it would be item. So now what's happening here is with every iteration, the map function is returning these JSX elements which represent the blog card. And to generate the content dynamically, we are simply doing the current item and the properties. So title and description. Let's save it. Now, after the map function is done, we'll have our array of JSX elements inside this blog cards. So we can simply use it here. So curly braces and the variable. Let's save it. Let's check it out. So as you can see, we've got these blog cards generated dynamically. Now, if you notice here, we're getting a warning. So each child in a list should have a unique key prop. So the reason is this key helps React identify which items have changed or are added or are removed. Now, 2 things to remember. A key should uniquely identify a list item among its siblings. And second, a key should be given to the outermost element which is being rendered inside the list. So let's give it a try. So this is the outermost element which is being rendered by this list. So we will add the key here. And now this key needs to be dynamic. So we can simply use the position which is being passed by map to the callback function. That is going to be unique for the entire list. So comma and position, and we can simply pass that position here. So if we save and check our console again, the error is gone. Or another option would be if our blog objects had ID. So we can simply use that ID. So that would be item.id. Let's save it. And as you can see, still no errors here. So just a quick tip. Using position is considered a bad practice. So use the object's ID whenever possible. Or you can also create a function which generates unique keys for you. And that's all for today. I hope this gave you a better understanding of how to render components dynamically using lists. But if you have any doubts or queries, feel free to drop a comment below or reach out to me on Twitter. I'll add my Twitter handle in the description below. See you in the next video. Bye and take care.